It was July in 1518. A woman named Frau Trophea stepped out into a street in Strasbourg. Strasbourg was a city in the Holy Roman Empire. Today, it's part of France. Frau Trophea started to dance. She didn't stop. This wasn't a normal dance. It wasn't for joy. It wasn't for a festival. She just danced. She danced alone. Her body moved without her wanting it to stop. People saw her. They were confused. They watched her. Hours passed. She kept dancing. Her feet moved. Her arms swung. She didn't seem to get tired. Or maybe she did, but couldn't stop. One day became 2 days, then 3. She danced for days. She couldn't control her own movements. Her body just moved. It moved constantly. People started to worry. This was strange. This was not right. A person cannot dance for days without rest. It's not possible. But she did. Soon other people joined her. It's not clear exactly how many days passed before this happened. But it did happen. Maybe a few people joined the first week, then more. By the end of July, many people were dancing. They couldn't stop either. This was the start of something very strange, something scary. It was later called the Dancing Plague of 1518, or sometimes the Dance Epidemic, or just the Dancing Mania. No one really knew what was happening. They just saw people dancing, and dancing, and dancing, until they dropped. Strasbourg was a busy city then. It had many people. It was a center for trade. It was a place with its own problems too. The poor were many. Sickness was common. Life was hard for most people. There was not a lot of food always. Famine had happened before. And disease. These things made people scared. They made people stressed. But this dancing was different. It wasn't a cough. It wasn't a fever. It was a strange, unstoppable movement. People watched. They tried to understand. But there was no easy answer. The first few dancers were just a few. But the number grew fast. Within a few weeks, dozens of people were caught in this dancing fit. It wasn't just Frau Trophea anymore. It was many. Men, women, and children, too. They all danced. Their bodies twisted and turned. Their feet shuffled. Their arms flailed. They seemed to be in a trance. Or in pain. It was hard to tell. They danced in the streets. They danced until their clothes were torn. They danced until their feet bled. They danced until they collapsed from exhaustion. Some even died. They died from heart attacks. They died from strokes. They died from simply being too tired. Their bodies gave out. The city officials started to notice, how could they not? There were many people dancing in the streets. This was not a small thing. It was a public event, a public problem. They needed to do something, but what? What do you do when people just start dancing and can't stop? At first, the city officials thought it was a curse or a punishment from God. People in those days believed a lot in God. They believed in good and evil. They believed in divine judgment. So a strange event like this would make them think of God's anger. They thought maybe it was caused by hot blood. This was an idea in old medicine. They believed that too much blood, or blood that was too hot, could make people sick, or make them act strangely. So they tried to treat it with bloodletting. This meant cutting someone to let blood out. It was a common medical practice then. It didn't work. The dancers kept dancing. Another idea was that the dancers were possessed by demons or evil spirits. This was also a common belief. If someone acted strangely, it could be a demon. So they might try religious rituals or exorcisms, but these didn't work either. The dancing continued. The number of dancers grew. It was not just a few people, it was a lot. Some historical accounts say hundreds. Maybe up to 400 people, all dancing without control. It was a spectacle. A terrifying one. Imagine walking through your city and seeing hundreds of people just dancing, non-stop. Some collapsing, some dying. It would be a nightmare. The summer was hot. The dancing was relentless. The city was in a panic. No one had seen anything like it. It was a mystery, a medical mystery, a social mystery, a religious mystery. Everyone had their own idea, but no one had a solution. The officials had to act. They couldn't just let people dance to their deaths. The city needed order. It needed answers. They held meetings. They discussed what to do. They listened to doctors. They listened to priests. They listened to local leaders, but no one knew for sure. The dancing plague kept going. It was a real event. Many historical records talk about it. Chronicles, medical notes, city records, they all mention this strange time. It was not a made-up story. People really did dance until they died. This was real. And it was very scary for the people living through it. The city tried different things. They had to. They couldn't just stand by. They tried to understand the cause. They tried to find a cure. But everything they tried didn't work. The dancing went on. It grew worse. It spread further. and the people of Strasbourg watched in horror. They waited for it to end, but it seemed like it never would. The initial days of Frau Troffia's solo dance turned into weeks of a growing public frenzy. The single woman became dozens, then hundreds. The initial confusion turned into fear, then desperation. The city itself seemed to be caught in this strange, unstoppable rhythm. It was a profound challenge to their understanding of the world. What could cause such a thing, and how could they make it stop? These questions would plague the city for weeks, and the dancing would continue to grow. The dancing plague kept growing. More and more people joined in. It wasn't just a few streets anymore. It spread throughout Strasbourg. The sight of people flailing was common. It became part of daily life, a terrifying part. People tried to go about their business. But how could they ignore it? The number of people dancing climbed higher. It went from dozens to hundreds. Some records say 400 people were dancing at its peak. This was a lot of people for a city like Strasbourg in 1518. It would have felt like the whole city was going mad. The city council, known as the magistrates, met. They were in charge. They had to make decisions. They needed to stop this. But they had no idea how. They consulted with doctors. They consulted with priests. They tried to find a cure. The local doctors had a theory. It was based on the medical ideas of the time. They thought the dancing was caused by hot blood. This was a common idea. They believed certain humors or fluids in the body caused illness. Too much of one humor could lead to problems. They thought the dancers had too much hot blood. This made their brains overheat. This made them dance. So the doctors advised a strange cure. They said the dancers needed to dance it out. Yes, that's what they said. They thought the problem was internal. If the dancers just kept dancing, the hot blood would be used up, or it would cool down. And then the dancing would stop. This might sound crazy to us now, but it made a kind of sense to them. If the cause was inside, then the cure should be to let it run its course, and they thought dancing was the way to do it. The magistrates agreed. They actually encouraged the dancing. They decided to make special places for the dancers. They opened 2 guild halls. These were big buildings. They also built a stage. They hired musicians. They thought music would help. It would make the dancers keep going. It would help them dance out the hot blood faster. They even cleared the streets. They wanted to give the dancers space. They thought if the dancers kept moving, they would get better. This was their solution, their way to deal with this strange, terrifying plague. Think about that for a moment. People were dying from dancing, and the city's leaders said, more dancing is the answer. It seems so counterintuitive, so wrong, but in their minds, they were following the best medical advice they had. They were trying to help. So the city created this strange, grim festival, a festival of death. People danced to their end, to the sound of flutes and drums. Hired musicians played music for them, to keep them going, to keep them dancing. This was supposed to be the cure, but it didn't work. Of course, it didn't work. The dancing continued, and people continued to die. They died from exhaustion. They died from heart attacks. They died from strokes. Some starved, some were dehydrated. The stress on their bodies was immense. The idea of hot blood was wrong. This plan backfired badly. Instead of helping, it seemed to make things worse. The spectacle of the dancing became even more public. It might have even encouraged more people to join, or to get caught up in the mass hysteria. Seeing so many people dancing, and being told it was the cure, might have pushed others over the edge. The deaths kept happening. Some records say 15 people died each day at the peak. This was a huge number. For a city in that time, it was a catastrophe. The burial grounds filled up. The city was in a crisis. The magistrates realized their mistake. The dancing was not stopping. The deaths were not stopping. The hot blood theory was not working. They had to change course. Their first attempt had failed. And it had cost many lives, so they tried something different. They started to forbid the dancing. They banned public dancing. They tore down the stages. They stopped the musicians. They tried to make people stop. They also started to separate the dancers. They tried to take them to special places, places where they could rest, places where they could be cared for. They also turned to religion. This was common in those days. If medicine didn't work, maybe God would. They thought perhaps it was a curse or a punishment. They looked to Saint Vitus. Saint Vitus was a saint known for healing dancing mania. People believed he could help. So they took the dancers to the shrine of Saint Vitus. This shrine was in a small town nearby. It was called Saverne. They put the dancers in carts. They took them on a journey. They hoped a pilgrimage would help. They hoped the saint would intervene. At the shrine, priests performed rituals. They blessed the dancers, they gave them special shoes, shoes that were supposed to be blessed by St. Vitus. They made them wear these shoes, they prayed for them, they hoped for a miracle. And slowly, the dancing began to subside. It's not clear if it was the pilgrimage itself, or if the plague was just running its course, or if the change of environment helped, or if it was the combined effect of all of these things, but eventually the number of dancers lessened. People started to recover. The frenzy began to fade. By September, the dancing plague was mostly over. It had lasted for weeks, maybe 2 months in total. It had taken many lives. It had caused panic and confusion. It had shown how desperate people were, how easily they could be led, how little they understood certain illnesses. The city of Strasbourg had gone through something terrible. They had tried their best with the knowledge they had. Their first attempt at a cure was a disaster. Their second attempt, involving religious intervention and stopping the public spectacle, seemed to work. Or at least coincided with the end of madness. This period left a deep mark on the city. People remembered it. It was talked about for years. It became a strange, cautionary tale. A story of a city gripped by an invisible force. A force that made people dance until they died. And how the leaders with good intentions made things worse before they got better. This shows us how much medical understanding has changed, and how fear can drive strange decisions. The events of 1518 were a stark reminder of human vulnerability. It showed how society reacts to the unknown, how easily mass hysteria can take hold, and how simple explanations, even if wrong, can shape desperate actions. The dancing plague was more than just people dancing. It was a mirror reflecting the fears and beliefs of an entire era. The people of 1518 didn't have science as we know it today. They lived in a world filled with mystery. They saw God in everything. They saw evil spirits too. So, when the dancing plague hit Strasbourg, people looked for answers in what they knew. And what they knew was often religious or superstitious. One big idea was that it was a curse, and a punishment from God. Why would God punish them? Maybe for their sins, for not being good enough, for being greedy or wicked. This was a common belief for any disaster. Floods, famines, diseases. They were all seen as God's anger. So the dancing plague fit this pattern. People would pray. They would ask for forgiveness. They hoped God would stop the dancing. Another strong belief was that it was the work of demons or evil spirits. If someone acted in a strange way, it often pointed to possession. The dancers were not in control of their bodies. Their movements were jerky. They looked tormented. So it made sense to many that a demon had taken hold of them. Priests would perform exorcisms. They would try to drive out the evil. But this did not stop the dancing either. There was also the figure of Saint Vitus. We mentioned him before. He was a real saint. But over time, people started to link him to dancing illnesses. There have been other outbreaks of dancing mania in Europe before 1518. Some of these were called Saint Vitus's dance. So people believed he could both cause and cure it. Why Saint Vitus? It's a bit unclear. One story says he was martyred by being thrown into a pot of boiling oil, but he didn't die. He danced out of it. This might be where the link comes from, or maybe it was just a local tradition that grew. But whatever the reason, he was the saint people turned to. They hoped he would save them from the dancing. The doctors of the time had their hot blood theory. We talked about that. They believed in the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These humors needed to be balanced in the body. If they weren't, you got sick. Too much hot blood was their explanation for the dancing. It was a physical theory, but based on a very old understanding of the body. They didn't know about germs. They didn't know about viruses. They didn't know how the brain really worked, so their treatments were limited. Bloodletting was common. It meant cutting a vein to let blood out. They thought this would reduce the hot blood. Often done with leeches, too. They would put leeches on the skin. The leeches would suck blood. This was meant to restore balance, but it often made people weaker, and it certainly didn't stop the dancing. They also used purgatives. These were medicines to make you vomit or have diarrhea. They thought this would cleanse the body, get rid of the bad humors. Again, it often just made people sicker, and didn't solve the real problem. There was also a belief in curses, not just from God, but from other people. Maybe a witch had put a curse on the city, or on certain individuals. People were very afraid of witches then. They believed witches could do evil magic, so they might look for someone to blame. Someone who could have put such a terrible spell on them. Another idea, more subtle, was about the power of music. The city leaders themselves thought music could help the dancers. They thought it would aid in dancing out the hot blood. But this also shows how they saw music, not just as entertainment, but as something with power. Power to influence the body and mind. They used drums and flutes. They believed these sounds could help control the uncontrollable movements. But they seem to have the opposite effect. They might have just pushed the dancers to keep going, or even encouraged others to join the frantic rhythm. Some people might have thought it was a type of madness, a mental illness, but their understanding of mental illness was very different from ours. It was often linked to demons, sin, or physical imbalances like the humors. They didn't have terms like mass hysteria or psychogenic illness. But they saw the strange behavior. They knew it wasn't normal. The people watching, the families of the dancers, were desperate. They would have tried anything. They would have prayed. They would have gone to priests. They would have gone to doctors. They would have listened to any advice. Imagine seeing your loved one dance for days, getting weaker and weaker. You would grab at any hope, any explanation. The lack of a clear scientific explanation for the dancing plague made it even more terrifying. It left a vacuum that was filled by religious fears, superstitious beliefs, and outdated medical theories. The city was fertile ground for such a crisis. It had a history of social unrest. It had poverty, it had famine. These conditions made people stressed. They made them vulnerable. The attempts to cure the dancing plague reflect the limits of knowledge in the 16th century. They were well-meaning attempts, but they were based on wrong ideas. The doctors and priests were doing what they thought was best. But without understanding the true cause, their efforts were mostly useless, and in some cases harmful. It's a stark reminder of how far medical science has come. Today we have a much better understanding of the human body and mind. We know about psychology, we know about neurology, we know about toxins, but in 1518, they were flying blind. They were trying to solve a puzzle with very few pieces, and many of those pieces were wrong. This chapter shows how different the world was then, how much people relied on faith and old beliefs. How scary it must have been to face something completely new and incomprehensible. The dancing plague truly tested their understanding of the world, and it showed how their attempts to find answers often just led to more suffering. Today, we look back at the dancing plague of 1518 with different eyes. We have much more knowledge. We can make better guesses about what really happened. No one knows for sure, of course. It was a long time ago, but we have some strong ideas. One of the main ideas is something called psychogenic illness, or sometimes mass psychogenic illness. What does that mean? It means a physical illness caused by the mind. It's not fake. The people really feel sick. They really have symptoms, but there isn't a physical cause like a germ or a broken bone. Instead, it's caused by psychological stress, by anxiety, by fear. Imagine a group of people under extreme stress. They are worried about many things: famine, sickness, poverty. Life is hard. They see one person start to dance uncontrollably. This is very unusual. It's scary. They might think it's a curse, or a demon, or a sign from God. When people believe something like that, their minds can make their bodies react. The fear itself can cause physical symptoms. It's a bit like when you get so nervous before a speech that your stomach hurts. Or your hands shake. Your mind is causing a physical reaction. In a group, this can spread. One person sees another. They get scared. Their own stress levels are high. They might start to feel the same symptoms. Not because a germ jumped them, but because the fear and belief jumped to them. It's like a chain reaction of the mind. This is a very strong theory for the dancing plague. Strasbourg in 1518 was a place with a lot of stress. Famine had happened before. Poverty was widespread. Sickness was common. There was political unrest. People felt uncertain about their future. They were vulnerable. So when Frau Trophäa started dancing, it hit a nerve. People were already on edge. They were looking for an explanation for their suffering, and the strange dancing provided one, even if it was terrifying. The belief that it was a curse or a punishment could have fueled the fear. And that fear, combined with the extreme stress, could have caused others to start dancing. The city's initial response probably made it worse. When the magistrates said, "Dance it out," they gave permission. No, they gave an outlet. They basically said, "This is a real thing, and you should keep doing it." This could have confirmed people's fears. It might have made the spread faster. Another theory, less popular now but still discussed, is ergot poisoning. Ergot is a type of fungus. It grows on rye grain. Rye was a common food grain then. If people ate bread made from rye that had ergot, they could get very sick. Ergot poisoning is also called St. Anthony's fire. It can cause many symptoms. One type, called convulsive ergotism, causes muscle spasms. It causes convulsions, it causes hallucinations, people might twist and turn, they might have fits. they might feel like they are dancing. So some people think the dancing plague was caused by eating poisoned rye bread. It's possible. Ergot poisoning was a known problem in those days. It caused serious outbreaks of sickness. However, there are problems with this theory for the 1518 plague. Ergot poisoning usually affects whole families, or whole villages. It usually has other symptoms too, like gangrene, where parts of the body turn black and fall off, or extreme burning sensations. These were not widely reported for the dancing plague. The main symptom was just uncontrollable dancing. Also, it usually doesn't affect hundreds of people at once in exactly the same way, with only dancing as the dominant symptom. So, while ergot poisoning is a possibility for some historical outbreaks of strange behavior, it's less likely for the 1518 dancing plague specifically. The main symptom not matching perfectly makes it less strong than the psychogenic theory. Another idea is that it was a mix of things. Maybe some people were initially affected by something else, like a mild illness, and then the mass hysteria took over, or perhaps a few people genuinely had a condition that made them move uncontrollably, and then others, under stress, mimicked it or developed psychogenic symptoms. It's also important to remember the cultural context. In 1518, people lived in a world where dancing manias were not entirely new. There had been other outbreaks in Europe over the centuries. These previous events could have created a kind of script in people's minds, a belief that such a thing could happen. If people believed in St. Vitus's dance, they might be more prone to developing it if conditions were right. The extreme religious beliefs played a role too. The idea of divine punishment, or demonic possession. These were very real fears. If you thought God was punishing you by making you dance, it would be a terrifying experience. This fear would only add to the stress and possibly the psychogenic symptoms. So, when we put it all together, the psychogenic illness theory seems the most likely. It explains why so many people were affected. It explains why it spread so fast. It explains why it was mostly just dancing, without other clear physical symptoms of a poison. And it fits with the known social conditions of Strasbourg at the time. It shows us the power of the human mind. How stress, fear, and shared belief can affect our bodies in profound ways. It's a powerful reminder that our mental state is deeply connected to our physical state. And that sometimes the biggest plague is not a germ, but the invisible weight of societal anxiety and collective fear. The dancing plague wasn't just a strange historical event. It was a window into how the human mind can break under pressure, and how a society can struggle to cope when faced with something utterly inexplicable. Today, we can look back and understand a little better. But for the people in 1518, it was just pure, terrifying mystery. The dancing plague of 1518 is a strange story. It's almost unbelievable, people dancing until they died. It sounds like something from a dark fairy tale. But it was real, and because it was so real and so strange, it left a lasting mark. It's remembered because it's so extreme. It's a stark example of how society can react to the unknown, how fear can spread like a virus, and how the line between mind and body can blur under intense stress. What can we learn from it? One big lesson is about mass hysteria, or what modern science calls mass psychogenic illness. The dancing plague shows us the incredible power of the mind, not just one mind, but many minds together. When a whole group of people are under stress and they share a common fear or belief, strange things can happen. Symptoms can spread. Not because of germs, but because of shared anxiety. This still happens today. We see it in smaller forms, like a group of students suddenly feeling sick after someone reports a strange smell, or a panic spreading through a crowd. The dancing plague is an extreme version of this. It reminds us that our mental health and our social environment are just as important as physical health. Another lesson is about how we explain things we don't understand. In 1518, people didn't have microscopes. They didn't have psychology textbooks. They used what they had: religion, superstition, and very old medical ideas. They tried their best. But their explanations were often wrong, and their solutions sometimes made things worse. This teaches us to be humble, to question, to always seek better understanding. It shows how important science and evidence are. We can't just guess. We need to investigate. We need to test ideas. If we don't, we might make bad decisions, just like the Strasbourg magistrates did when they told people to dance more. It also highlights the importance of social conditions. Strasbourg in 1518 was not a happy place for many. There was poverty, there was hunger, there was disease. These things create a lot of stress. They make people more vulnerable, more likely to fall into panic or extreme reactions. When people are desperate, they are more susceptible to strange phenomena. They are more open to unusual beliefs. They are more likely to react strongly to an unexplained event. This reminds us that society has a role to play in public health. Good living conditions, food security, and access to care can make a population more resilient to psychological stressors. The dancing plague also shows us the human need for meaning. When something terrible and inexplicable happens, people want to know why. They want an answer. Even if the answer is scary, like a curse from God or a demon, it's better than no answer at all. It gives a framework. It helps people cope, even if it's the wrong framework. It also reminds us of how much our understanding of the body and mind has changed. The medical theories of the 16th century seem primitive to us, but they were the best they had. We now know so much more about neurology, psychology, and public health. This progress helps us prevent and treat similar issues today. The story of the dancing plague endures because it's a powerful human drama. It's about suffering. It's about fear. It's about people trying to make sense of madness. It's about a community facing an invisible enemy that attacks from within. It's also a reminder that history isn't just about kings and wars. It's about everyday people. It's about their lives, their struggles, their beliefs, and sometimes their incredibly strange experiences. The dancing plague shows us a side of human history that is deeply psychological and social. This event might seem like an odd footnote in history, but it's actually very important. And it's one of the best documented examples of mass hysteria. It has been studied by doctors, historians, and psychologists for centuries. They all try to understand it. They all try to draw lessons from it. And the biggest lesson might be simple: humans are complex. Our minds are powerful. Our societies shape us. And when we are pushed to our limits, strange things can happen. Things that defy easy explanation, things that challenge our understanding of what it means to be human. The dancing plague of 1518 is a unique and unsettling chapter in human history. It stands as a testament to the fragile line between order and chaos, between reason and madness. And it continues to fascinate us, not just as a bizarre historical event, but as a mirror reflecting the enduring mysteries of the human condition. It makes us think. It makes us wonder. And it reminds us to look beyond the obvious for answers, always.